Hey y'all, this is Brian with Westcott Woodworks. I'm going to show you how to make some flooring transitions today. This one here is just a basic threshold with a little dado cut on the left hand side, and then some angled cuts on it that we'll do on the table saw, and I'll explain that later along with what saw blade I'd recommend using to do that. And this one here is a reducer, which as you can see, it's got a little groove cut into the side of it that'll fit the little tongue for the hardwood flooring, and then it's got this round over edge put on it as well. If you want to see both of these kind of in action and what they would look like installed, just go back to the beginning of this video. I've got some pictures of them there. But to make the different cuts on the router table with this for this reducer, I'm going to use a couple different bits here. This is the Freud Rail and Style bit set. It is adjustable, so you can adjust these anywhere between 7/32 to 3/8. This one here on the left cuts the groove out, which I've got in this reducer over here, and this bit here would cut a tongue if you needed to put one of those on for tongue and groove or whatever it may be. But that's the router bit set I'll use to put the groove in. And then this other one here made by Freud is the table end and handrail bit. I'm not using it for either of those purposes. I'm using it for the purpose of putting this nice round over on this piece of hickory, which it powered through without a problem, even though hickory's kind of a gnarly grained wood, and it did just fine. But anyway, that's what we're going to show you today. Alright, well, the first thing you want to do here is make sure that you've got the fence lined up with this bearing here. That way it doesn't let the workpiece shift back and forth in it, because you've got the fence holding it in place. So what I do, make sure that obviously your router's unplugged and disconnected from the power. Then I just hold like a straight edge up to the bearing, and you bring your fence up to that, and then just lock it in place. And once that's done, like I said, when you get your workpiece, I'll just use this as an example. This is the flooring that we're going to tie it into. It's a hand-scraped hickory, but you can see that when it's going to be up against this, against the bearing, since it's level with this fence, or even with it, it won't let this workpiece move around any. So now that that's done, we can plug her back in up to the power, set our guard in place to the thickness of our workpiece, and get to routing. Alright, now like I said, the flooring I've got is 3/4 of an inch thick hickory. This piece of hickory here is 5/8 thick, because when I go to install this in my house, I've got hardwood floor going to linoleum floor. The linoleum floor sticks up off the subfloor about 1/8 of an inch. So that's why the reducer is going to be 5/8 of an inch, so it'll sit flat on that flooring and tie in to this hardwood flooring, which is 3/4 of an inch thick. So I'm going to put that round over on here to reduce it, so you have a smoother transition into it. Then we'll take it to the table saw and rip it down to 2 1/4 inches, which is how wide I want the reducer to be. Alright, we're over here at the table saw now. You can see that I've got the reducer, the angle cut in there, or the round over rather. So the next thing I'm going to do is cut this at 2 1/4 inches wide, because that's how wide I want my reducer to be. To cut that down to size, since I'm cutting through hickory, it's pretty tough wood. I've used this blade on a couple other videos, but this is the thin line, or not thin line, the thin kerf glue line rip blade by Freud. And I like it because it's got the alternating teeth, one being a flat top, the other one having the dual bevel on every other tooth. But again, if you're cutting stock that's, you know, up to an inch thick, this blade here really cuts through the stuff like it's butter. I know people say that a lot, but this really does fly through the stuff. But anyway, we're going to cut it down to 2 1/4 inches. All right, we're back over here at the router table now. We've got this cut down to 2 1/4 inches thick. That's what it looks like right there. The next thing I'm going to do is, since I'm tying this right into tongue and groove hardwood flooring, I'm going to use the Freud rail and style set. So I'm going to set this up so that I'm going to cut a groove into my reducer here that's going to be the same size as this tongue on my flooring. To do that, I got to make sure that since this is 3/4 and here and this one's 5/8, I need to make sure that you know, I want the tops of these to line up. Since the linoleum sits an 1/8 of an inch higher, it'll raise this up to make it 3/4 of an inch. So when I cut this, I'm going to be cutting this upside down like this to get the groove where I need it to be, so it matches up with the top side of this flooring. So I'm going to set it up. And now that I've got the tongue and groove, this is one that cuts the groove because that's what I want in the workpiece. I've got it put in the router, and then set back in the router table. This is the cord to plug the router in, so it's unplugged. What I do is I take my wrench that you take the collets on and off with, and I just put it in there and just kind of set it up against the base of it. And then you're going to take, if you're using this Freud set, it's a 1/2 inch wrench, and you just put it on there, and you can once it's set up against the fixed base, it's pretty easy to take this nut off, and then you can access all the shims to take this apart, so you can set it up to cut the groove that you want. So for this one, the minimum groove cut in this piece, if I were to stick that in there, it wiggles back and forth, so I'm going to put some shims in here to make this a little wider so it fits the groove. That's set up to where I think I need it to be. It's worst case scenario, it's going to be a little bit too snug, so I just take this back apart and add another shim in there, which will make this groove in here a little bit wider, so I can slip my the flooring onto the reducer. The way this is set up, it does have a little bearing on here, but if I run this the way it is up against this bearing, it's going to cut the groove about twice as deep as it needs to be, and I don't need to do that. So what I'm going to do is push this piece of flooring into the groove, or push the bit into the groove. Now I'm just going to line the fence up with that, set it back just a little bit, and then tighten the fence down, so that when I go to run this, again, it's going to cut a groove that's identical to this one. So I'm going to go ahead, we're going to get our reducer here. We want to cut, again, upside down. We're going to cut it this way, so we can bring in our guard and get it set to the right height. Tighten it up here. And at this point, we're ready to go. I'm going to get another piece of wood, and we're going to run it behind here just as a safety piece to make sure everything goes through there smooth and safely. Now, as you can see, I went ahead. This is a good time. If you've got a feather board, this is a good time to use it because it's a longer, skinny piece, so it'll hold it up against the fence down here. And I've got this other piece, so I can push it all the way through. Alright, as you can see, it's got the groove cut in there. The lip down here at the bottom is not real big, but I'm not too concerned about it because this is going to lay flush on the linoleum floor. Okay, now we're back to the moment of truth here, where we've got our reducer and we've got our piece of flooring here. So we got to make sure they fit up good, because when it gets installed, I'd rather put it down there, put it in place, nail it in, and be done with it, rather than have to bring it back out here and set everything up. So we're going to see if it fits here. Let's get that lined up. And it's a little snug, but that's all right. You can see it does fit in there. Let's see if I can't get this to focus any better on here. Okay, there you go. Now you can see it's in there, it's lined up. The only difference is this flooring, being that it's hand scraped, it has a micro bevel around all four edges. So that's why you can see the flooring kind of bevels down a little, whereas this reducer I just made doesn't. And then you can see at the bottom I've got this 1/8 inch gap where the linoleum is going to sit underneath. So that's a great way to transition between one floor to the next, so you don't have a big gap, or not a big gap, but what they might call a toe stubber. Some people may even want to take a random orbit sander and go ahead and knock more of that down if you want to, but I'm alright with it because it's in the middle of a threshold of a door, so I'm not too concerned. But I'm happy with the way it came out. The next thing we're going to look at is how to make just a regular floor transition. This next piece here is a normal transition strip to go between, hardwood to hardwood, or in this case hardwood to tile. So I'm just going to go through the way you kind of set up for this. Right now this has got that 0 clearance insert plate, so you're going to take that out and put in your standard size insert plate, and then after that you're going to angle the blade. I kind of drew a rough sketch here in the end of what this thing is going to look like. This is for my home, so it doesn't have to be any precise measurements. Sometimes people will give you what the measurements are, but as you can see, if I get that to focus there, right up in here is where the hardwood is going to sit. So I'm going to cut all that out, and then you're going to bevel this angle here, and then bevel this angle, and this is where the tile sits in here. So that'll help transition between the two different types of flooring. Okay, so I've got that standard throat plate back in there. First cut I make on these things is the part where the hardwood flooring is going to sit. I go ahead and make this long cut up here first. It's a lot easier to do that when the bottom of this is all still intact. If I cut this bevel off, then that's less room I've got riding on this tabletop, and I don't want it to kick out or anything while I'm cutting something that thick over the saw blade. So I've got the blade raised up to about 1.5 inches, which is what I want this cut to be depth wise, and I've got the fence set so that it'll cut out from this line over. Again, this is that Freud thin kerf glue line rip blade that I've used for this other part of the video for the reducer, as well as some other ones. The reason I'm using it, I know it's mainly meant to rip materials that are 1 inch thick or less. This is going to be 1.5 inches, but the reason I'm using it is, if you may not be able to see it in this video. Again, I've got the saw unplugged, but every other tooth, one of them, this one here has got a bevel on this side, a bevel on this side, and then it's got a flat tooth, which is really something that you need when you're going to be cutting. Let me flip this over here. When you're going to be cutting like a dado out, if you will, on the table saw, because it's going to leave a square edge in this corner, whereas if you use a beveled tooth blade, it's going to leave a little bevel, which may not matter much sometimes, but in an application like this, since I want there to not be a whole lot of wiggle room once all the floor and everything is in, I want it to be cut up and squared up good. So I've got that all set up, so I'm going to make this first cut. that long groove is cut in there. The next cut I'm going to make is going to be to cut this little bevel out here. So to do that, I'm just going to take my blade, tilt down here, and generally for some of these cuts, if you don't want it to be like a toe stubber, I usually don't angle it a ton. It's usually between like 10 to 20 degrees. It just depends on how big the reducer is you're going to make. But for this one, I'm probably going to set it close in here to like 8 and make this next cut. Alright, so again, I've got this set at about 8 degrees. I lowered my blade back down. I'm just going to turn it on and run it in just a tad, just to see where it's at. I also moved the fence out just a little bit. So as you can see with this, I need to raise the blade up a little bit more so it cuts all of that off. But I'm happy with the angle that's on there, so I'm going to go ahead, raise the blade up a little bit, and cut the rest of that all the way down. Again, with all of these transitions, as long as it fits in there, there is no like science to the exact angle this needs to be. Some of it's just guess and check and just see what looks right. And just think, hey, if this is in my house, you know, would I want to run into a lip that's this big with my toe, or would I rather make something that's got a smaller bevel on it? So again, I'm just going to raise this up and cut the rest of it. Alright, the last angle to cut here is going to be this one that goes this other direction, where it's going to lay on top of the tile. So again, just pick out an angle that looks about right. This one's probably going to be somewhere in the area of about a 16-degree angle. But again, if it doesn't look right, then I'll just put it back on there and cut it again. So I'm going to have to move my fence back out a little bit, and then we're going to go ahead and make this last cut. This is going to be the last cut I make. I've got to cut this little piece out to where that dado, to finish the dado type cut. You can do this with a dado machine. It's just sometimes it's easier to use the blade that's already on there and just make 2 cuts versus trying to set up a dado to the right height and make multiple passes. So that's why I chose to do. Anyway, I'm going to set this up so that the blade cuts right to where this corner is, and then set the height so it doesn't cut into the rest of the reducer. Alright, and just like with the rest of the passes, I'm going to go ahead and just make one small cut in here just to make sure everything's lined up how it should be. Alright, now that everything's set up how I want, I made my small test cut just to make sure. I went ahead and set up my gripper jig here so that I can do this last cut safely, and we're going to go ahead and make it now. Alright, so as you can see, I've got a little bit of trimming to do on this end, which was alright. I made it longer than it needed to be, to where, you know, when I did my little sample cut, it cut in a little bit too high, but I'm not worried about it. I could trim that off. But that'll be the end of this video. If you've got any questions, just put them in the comments box below, and I'm usually pretty quick at answering these things. So I hope you enjoyed it.